The Kolari fleet appeared in the sky above New Eden like a dark cloud of metal and death. Chief Engineer Maya Chen stood on the balcony of the colony's main power station and watched as the first ships broke through the atmosphere. She counted 12 destroyer-class vessels, each one big enough to block out the sun. Behind them, barely visible against the darkness of space, she could see the shapes of even larger ships waiting in orbit. The colony had been warned. 3 days ago, a damaged merchant ship had limped into their system with news that the Kolari were coming. The ship's captain, a grizzled old spacer named Jonas Webb, had barely been able to speak through his terror. He had watched the Kolari destroy a colony of 50,000 people in less than a day. He had escaped only because his ship was small and damaged enough to be ignored. The Kolari did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply consumed everything in their path. That was their way. That was what they had done to every world they had ever encountered. They were an insectoid species that spread across the galaxy like a plague, absorbing other civilizations into their empire. Their soldiers were fast and strong and covered in natural armor that could stop most weapons. Their ships were ancient and powerful, built using technology that humanity could not match. New Eden was a mining colony on the edge of human space. It had 12,000 people, most of them workers and their families. Children played in the streets. Families ate dinner together in small apartments. Old people sat on benches and watched the sunset. It was a simple place, a working place, a place where people lived quiet lives far from the politics and wars of the core worlds. It had no military ships. It had no orbital defense platforms. It had exactly 47 security officers with light weapons that would do nothing against Kolari armor. The nearest military base was 3 days away by hyperspace. Help would not arrive in time. What it did have was Maya Chen and her team of 32 engineers. Maya turned away from the window and walked back into the power station. The main floor was chaos. Engineers ran between stations, pulling cables and moving equipment. Sparks flew from welding torches. The smell of hot metal and burning plastic filled the air. In the center of the room, surrounded by spare parts and broken machines, stood the thing they had been building for the past 3 days. It did not look like a weapon. It looked like a mistake. It was a mess of power cables, mining lasers, and pieces from 3 different vehicles. The base was made from an old transport shuttle that no longer flew, its hull stripped and repurposed. The main structure was built from drilling equipment meant to cut through rock, modified and rebuilt in ways that would have horrified its original designers. The power source was the station's backup generator, modified beyond recognition by engineers who had worked without sleep for 72 hours. Marcus Webb, Maya's second-in-command and nephew of the ship captain who had brought the warning, looked up from his work as she approached. His face was covered in grease and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands were burned from a welding accident the night before, but he had refused to stop working. None of them had slept much in the past 3 days. There was no time for sleep. There was no time for anything except work. "The fleet has arrived," Maya said. Marcus nodded. He did not seem surprised. They had known this moment was coming. They had been racing against it since the warning arrived. "How long do we have?" "Based on what happened at other colonies, maybe 6 hours before they start landing troops, maybe less. They like to scan first, identify resources, plan their assault, but they won't wait long. We need 8 hours to finish the power coupling." Maya looked at the device. It was ugly and strange, and it probably would not work. Every calculation said it should not work. Every scientific principle suggested it was impossible. But it was all they had. It was the only thing standing between 12,000 people and extinction. "Then we work faster," she said. Across the room, a young engineer named David Park was arguing with an older woman named Dr. Sarah Walsh. Sarah was a physicist who had come to New Eden to study rare minerals in the planet's crust. She had published papers in prestigious journals. She had won awards for her research. She had never built a weapon in her life. Now she was trying to calculate how much power their device would need to function, using equations she was inventing on the spot. "The numbers don't work," Sarah said. She showed David a tablet covered in equations. Her handwriting was messy, scrawled in haste, but the math was solid. "Even if we connect every power source in the colony, we won't have enough energy to create a field that size. We're talking about affecting ships in orbit. The power requirements are astronomical." "Then we make the field smaller," David said. He was young, barely out of engineering school, but he had a mind that worked in creative ways. He saw solutions where others saw only problems. "If we make it smaller, we won't hit enough of them to matter. We might take out a few dropships, maybe damage a destroyer if we're lucky, but the rest of their fleet will just destroy us before we can fire again. This has to be all or nothing." Maya walked over to them. "What's the problem?" Sarah explained in detail. The device they were building was based on a theory that had never been tested. It existed only in academic papers and theoretical discussions. The basic idea was simple enough to understand. All Kolari technology used a specific type of power source called a quantum resonance core. These cores were incredibly efficient, far more advanced than anything humanity had developed. But they had a weakness. They operated at a very specific frequency, and if that frequency was disrupted, the cores would overload and explode. The device they were building was supposed to create a resonance field that would interfere with those cores. It would broadcast a disruption signal across a wide area, causing every Kolari power source in range to fail catastrophically. It was a simple idea. The problem was scale. "We need to affect their entire landing force at once," Sarah said. "If we only hit a few ships, the rest will just destroy us before we can fire again. We need to catch them when they're clustered together, preferably during the landing approach when they're most vulnerable." Maya thought about this. She looked at the device, then at the power station around them. The generators hummed with energy, but it was not enough, not nearly enough. Then she looked out the window at the distant shape of the mining complex, where workers had been pulling minerals from the ground for decades. "What about the mining charges?" she asked. Everyone stopped working. The room went quiet. Mining charges were used to break apart large sections of rock deep underground. They were extremely powerful and extremely dangerous. A single charge could collapse a tunnel if used incorrectly. Using them near the surface was against every safety rule in the book. Using them in large quantities was something no one had ever tried. "You want to use explosives as a power source?" Marcus asked slowly. "Not explosives. The energy from the explosives." Maya grabbed a tablet and started drawing, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. "If we detonate the charges in a controlled sequence underground, we can channel the energy through the bedrock. The mineral deposits in the rock will conduct the energy like a wire. The planet itself becomes our power conductor." Sarah stared at her face went pale. "That's insane." "Can it work?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her eyes moved, calculating, considering. Her fingers twitched as if she was doing math in her head. After several minutes of silence, she looked up. "Maybe," she said slowly. "Maybe it can work. The mineral composition of this planet is unique. That's why we have a mining colony here. The crystal formations in the bedrock could theoretically conduct energy if properly aligned. But the timing has to be perfect. If the detonations are off by even a second, the energy won't flow correctly. It could scatter uselessly into the ground, or worse, it could feed back into the power station and kill us all. Then we make sure the timing is perfect." The next few hours were the longest of Maya's life. Half her team went underground to place the mining charges. They worked in the dark tunnels, surrounded by rock and silence, setting explosives with trembling hands. One mistake could bury them all. The other half stayed above to finish the device. Maya moved between both groups, checking their work and solving problems as they came up. The Kolari fleet hung in the sky like a threat, like a promise of death. They were not attacking yet. They were waiting, scanning the colony, analyzing the population, deciding the best way to destroy everything. Their sensors swept across the surface, mapping buildings and infrastructure. Their commanders discussed strategy in their alien language, debating the most efficient method of conquest. Governor Thomas Reed came to the power station just after noon. He was a thin man with worried eyes and hands that would not stop shaking. He had been a bureaucrat before this, a paper pusher who had taken the colonial governorship because it was supposed to be a quiet job. Now he was the leader of 12,000 people facing extinction. "Is it going to work?" he asked Maya. "I don't know," she said honestly. There was no point in lying. "What are our chances?" "I don't know that either. Maybe 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 100, maybe 0. We're trying something that has never been done before, using equipment that was never designed for this purpose. Everything about this is uncertain." The governor looked at the device. He did not understand what he was seeing, but he understood that it was his people's only hope. He understood that these exhausted engineers were the only thing standing between his colony and death. "What do you need?" he asked. "Time," Maya said, "and everyone to stay calm. If people panic, if they try to run or fight, it will only make things worse. We need everyone to stay in their homes and trust us." The governor nodded. "I can help with the second thing. The first is up to the Kolari." He left to speak to the colony. Maya turned back to her work. By mid-afternoon, the device was almost complete. The mining charges were in place underground, connected by a network of cables that would synchronize their detonation. 300 charges in total, spread across miles of tunnels, each one precisely positioned according to Sarah's calculations. The power station's generator was running at maximum output, feeding energy into the device's core. Everything was ready. But there was a problem. "The focal array is wrong," Marcus said. He was standing on top of the device, looking at a series of lenses they had taken from mining lasers. His face was grim. "The crystals are cracked. They won't hold the resonance pattern." Maya climbed up to look. He was right. The crystals had been damaged when they removed them from the lasers. The extraction process had been too rough, too hurried. There were hairline fractures running through each one. They were useless. "We need new crystals," she said. "We don't have any. These were the only artificial crystals in the colony. They were meant to last for years. We never had spares." Maya closed her eyes and tried to think. They were so close. The device was almost finished. Days of work, dozens of people pushing themselves to the breaking point. But without the focal array, it would not work. Without properly aligned crystals, the resonance field would scatter harmlessly into space. "What about natural crystals?" asked a voice behind her. Maya turned. It was David Park, the young engineer. He was holding a small rock that sparkled in the light. It was rough and unpolished, clearly just pulled from the ground, but the crystal formations inside it caught the light beautifully. "New Eden has some of the largest natural crystal formations in human space," David said. "That's why we have a mining colony here. The crystals are what we mine. What if we use those instead of artificial ones?" "Natural crystals aren't pure enough," Sarah said. She had climbed up to join them, her own exhaustion evident in every line of her face. "The resonance pattern would be distorted. Artificial crystals are grown in perfect conditions to have perfect molecular alignment. Natural crystals are full of impurities, variations, inconsistencies." "Distorted how?" Sarah thought about it, running calculations in her head. "The field wouldn't be uniform. It would be chaotic, unpredictable. We couldn't control exactly what frequency it produced or where the energy would go." "But would it still affect Kolari technology?" "Maybe, probably. The basic principle would still work, but we couldn't control it. We might hit them harder than expected, or we might miss entirely. We might affect a larger area or a smaller one. There's no way to predict." Maya looked at the crystal in David's hand. It was rough and uneven, full of flaws and impurities. It was nothing like the perfect artificial crystals they had planned to use, but it was real, it was here, and it might work. "Get me the biggest crystal formations you can find," Maya said. "We're going to do this the human way." The Kolari commander stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the small human colony below. His name was Xerix, and he had destroyed 12 worlds in his career. This one would be number 13. It was an unremarkable colony, a mining outpost with minimal technology and no defenses worth mentioning. It would fall quickly. His tactical officer approached with a report. She was younger than him, eager to prove herself but efficient at her job. "The colony has no military defenses," she said. "Population is approximately 12,000. They have minimal technology, mostly industrial and mining equipment. Estimated conquest time is 4 hours. "Begin landing operations," Xerix ordered. The first dropships launched from the fleet. They were ugly vessels, designed for function rather than beauty, capable of carrying hundreds of soldiers each. Inside them, thousands of Kolari soldiers waited in their harnesses, their weapons ready, their minds prepared for conquest. Each one was armed with weapons that could cut through human armor like paper. Each one had killed before and would kill again. The conquest of New Eden had begun. Xerix felt nothing. No excitement, no anticipation, no guilt. To him, humans were not enemies. They were not even obstacles. They were simply resources to be consumed. Their flesh would feed the swarm. Their technology would be absorbed and improved. Their worlds would become Kolari worlds. Their children would be taken and raised as servants. It was the natural order of things. The strong consumed the weak. That was how the universe worked. He did not know that deep underground, 32 human engineers were about to change everything. Maya watched the dropships descend. There were dozens of them, spreading out across the sky like falling stars, like dark angels coming to deliver death. Each one carried enough soldiers to kill everyone in the colony twice over. Each one was a promise of the destruction to come. "Is it ready?" she asked. "As ready as it's going to be," Marcus said. The device looked even stranger now. The natural crystals had been mounted in place of the damaged artificial ones. They jutted out at odd angles, rough and ugly and imperfect. Some were as big as a person's head. Others were tiny, barely larger than a fist. Together, they formed a chaotic array that looked more like a sculpture than a weapon. The whole thing hummed with barely contained energy, vibrating at frequencies that made Maya's teeth ache. "We should wait until more of them are in range," Sarah said. She was watching the dropships on a display screen, tracking their positions with mathematical precision. "If we fire too early, we won't hit enough of them." "If we wait too long, they'll land and scatter," David said. "Once they're on the ground, they'll spread out. We need to hit them while they're clustered together in the air." Maya watched the dropships. They were getting closer every second. She could see their shapes clearly now, ugly insectoid vessels that looked like flying beetles. Their engines glowed with alien energy. Their hulls were covered in strange symbols, markings in a language no human could read. "How many are in range?" she asked. "About 60% of the landing force," Sarah said. "If we wait 2 more minutes, it'll be 80%. 2 minutes, 120 seconds. Maya counted them in her head, feeling each one like a heartbeat. The dropships grew larger. She could see details now. Landing gear, weapon ports, the shapes of soldiers visible through small windows. 90 seconds, Sarah said. The first dropships were close enough now that Maya could see their landing gear extending. In less than a minute, they would touch down and release their soldiers. In less than 5 minutes, the killing would begin. 60 seconds. Maya's hand hovered over the activation switch. Her palm was sweating. Her heart was pounding. Everything they had worked for came down to this moment. 3 days of impossible work, of sleepless nights and desperate calculations. 32 engineers who had given everything they had. 30 seconds. The dropships were almost down. The lead vessel was only a few hundred meters from the ground. Maya could see the doors beginning to open. "Now," Maya said. Marcus pressed the button. For a moment nothing happened. The device hummed. The crystals glowed, but nothing seemed to change. Then the ground shook. Deep underground, 300 mining charges detonated in perfect sequence, exactly 1/10 of a second apart. The explosions were controlled, directed, channeled through carefully placed conduits. Energy pulsed through the bedrock, following the natural crystal formations in the rock, traveling through the planet itself like electricity through a wire. It flowed up through the power station's foundations and into the device. The generators screamed as power levels spiked beyond anything they were designed to handle. Warning lights flashed. Alarms sounded. The whole building shook. The natural crystals began to glow. They were not designed for this. They were not meant to carry this kind of power. They were just rocks, ordinary minerals formed by millions of years of geological pressure. But they held anyway, their impurities and flaws creating patterns that no artificial crystal could match. The resonance field that emerged was chaotic, unpredictable, wild. It was also far more powerful than anything they had planned. The field exploded outward, invisible to human eyes but devastating to anything with a Kolari power source. It swept across the sky like a shockwave, touching every dropship in range. The effect was immediate. Every Kolari dropship in range suddenly stopped in midair. Their engines flickered once, twice, then died completely. Their lights went dark. Their weapons powered down. Inside them, soldiers screamed as the gravity failed and artificial atmosphere began to leak. Then they began to fall. Maya watched in disbelief as dozens of dropships dropped from the sky like stones. They had no power, no control, no way to slow their descent. They crashed into the ground, into buildings, into each other. Explosions bloomed across the landscape like deadly flowers. The sound was deafening, a continuous roar of destruction that seemed to go on forever. "It worked," David whispered. His voice was full of wonder. But Maya was not celebrating. She was looking up at the fleet still hanging in orbit. The ships were moving, turning toward the power station. They had seen what happened to their dropships. They knew where the weapon was. "They know where we are," she said. The first orbital strike hit the colony 3 minutes later. It was a beam of concentrated energy, bright enough to blind anyone who looked directly at it, powerful enough to vaporize anything it touched. It destroyed an empty warehouse on the edge of town, turning the building into a crater of melted metal and burning debris. The second strike was closer. It took out a residential building that had already been evacuated, reducing it to rubble in an instant. The third strike was closer still. "They're targeting the power station," Marcus said. His voice was tight with fear. "They know that's where the weapon is. They're adjusting their aim with each shot." "Can we fire again?" Maya asked. Sarah was already checking the readings, her fingers flying across multiple displays. "The crystals are overheated. They absorb too much energy from the discharge. We need at least 20 minutes to cool them down, probably more." "We don't have 20 minutes. Another strike hit, closer this time. The ground shook and dust fell from the ceiling. A crack appeared in one of the walls. Somewhere in the distance, people were screaming. Maya looked at her team. They were exhausted and terrified. They had already done the impossible once, built a weapon from nothing in 3 days. Now she was asking them to do it again, to find another miracle when they had already used up all their luck. "Options," she said. "Give me options." "We could try cooling the crystals manually," David said. "Use the mining equipment to pump cold water from the underground lakes. It would bring down the temperature faster than natural cooling. That would take an hour at least. The pumps aren't designed for that kind of flow rate." "What about using different crystals?" Marcus asked. "We still have more from the mines. We could swap them out." "Swapping crystals would take even longer, and we'd have to recalibrate the entire array. We might not survive the calibration process if we're under bombardment. Another strike hit. This one was very close. The lights flickered and one of the windows cracked. A piece of ceiling fell, nearly hitting Sarah. They were running out of time. Maya looked at the device. It was still humming, still full of residual power. The crystals glowed with heat, hot enough to burn anyone who touched them. "What if we don't wait for them to cool down?" she asked quietly. Everyone stared at her. "If we fire with overheated crystals, they'll shatter," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, but her eyes were wide with fear. "The energy will go everywhere. It could destroy the entire station. It could kill us all." "Could it also destroy the fleet?" Sarah's face went pale. "You can't be serious." "Answer the question." Maybe. The chaotic discharge would be enormous, far bigger than what we just produced. If the resonance pattern holds even partially, it might affect ships in orbit. The range would be unpredictable. The intensity would be unpredictable. Everything would be unpredictable. Might. I can't give you better odds than that. This is beyond any calculation I can make. We're in territory no one has ever explored. Maya nodded slowly. She looked at her team one more time. These people had trusted her. They had worked without sleep for 3 days to build something that should not exist. They had believed in her when she told them they could save their colony. Now she was asking them to bet everything on one more impossible chance. "Everyone who wants to leave should leave now," she said. "I won't think less of anyone who goes. You've already done more than anyone could ask. You've already saved the people on those streets. Whatever happens next, you've earned the right to survive." No one moved, not one person. They all stood there looking at her, waiting. "We're staying," Marcus said simply. "We finish what we started." Maya felt something tighten in her chest. Pride, maybe, or love, or the knowledge that she was surrounded by the bravest people she had ever known. "Then let's change galactic warfare," she said. Commander Xerix watched the destruction of the human colony with growing irritation. His landing force had been nearly wiped out by some kind of energy weapon. 47 dropships destroyed in seconds. Thousands of soldiers dead before they could even reach the ground. It was unprecedented. It was humiliating. Now his remaining ships were conducting orbital strikes, trying to destroy the weapon before it could fire again. But the humans had placed it in a civilian area, surrounded by buildings and infrastructure. His weapons were powerful but not precise. Some of his strikes were missing the target. "Have we located the exact source?" he demanded. "Yes, Commander. It appears to be coming from a structure near the colony's power station. We have identified the building." "Destroy it." "We are trying, Commander, but the weapon appears to be underground or heavily shielded. Our strikes are causing damage but not eliminating the threat." Xerix made a sound of disgust. Humans and their primitive buildings, their chaotic construction, their lack of proper planning. It was one of their greatest weaknesses, but it was also, apparently, one of their strengths. "Concentrate all firepower on that location," he ordered. "I don't care how many civilians die. I don't care if we destroy half the colony. Destroy that weapon." His ships adjusted their targeting. A dozen energy beams lanced down from orbit, all aimed at the same point. The power station, the weapon, the humans who had dared to resist. They were too late. Maya pressed the button herself this time. Her hand was steady. Her mind was clear. She knew exactly what she was doing. She knew the odds, she knew the cost. The device screamed. The crystals cracked and shattered, unable to contain the forces flowing through them. Fragments flew everywhere, razor-sharp pieces of mineral that cut through the air like bullets. Energy exploded outward in every direction, raw and chaotic and unstoppable. The resonance field that hit the Kolari fleet was nothing like the controlled pulse they had used before. It was a wild storm of frequencies, unpredictable and devastating. It washed over the orbiting ships like a tidal wave. touching every power source, every system, every piece of Kolari technology. On board the Kolari flagship, every system failed at once. Engines shut down, weapons went offline, life support began to fail, lights flickered and died. The artificial gravity disappeared, sending crew members floating through the corridors. Commander Xerix had exactly 3 seconds to understand what was happening. 3 seconds to realize that the primitive humans had done the impossible. 3 seconds to feel something he had never felt before. Fear. Then his ship's reactor overloaded and exploded. Across the fleet, ship after ship suffered the same fate. Some exploded immediately, their reactors going critical in massive fireballs that lit up the sky. Others drifted helplessly, their crews dying as the air ran out or the cold of space crept in. A few managed to jump to hyperspace, their crews panicking and triggering emergency escape protocols. They fled in blind panic, not caring where they went, only knowing that they had to escape the death that had found them. Within 5 minutes, the Kolari fleet above New Eden had been reduced to scattered debris. The power station was destroyed. The device was nothing but twisted metal and broken crystals. Half the building had collapsed from the energy discharge. Fires burned in what remained. Smoke filled the air. But Maya Chen was alive. She crawled out of the rubble with Marcus's help, coughing dust and blood. Her left arm was broken, bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. She could not hear anything from her right ear. Blood dripped from a cut on her forehead. Every part of her body hurt. But she was alive. Around her, the rest of the team was emerging from the debris. Some were injured. Some were helping others. All of them were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they had all survived. "Did it work?" Marcus asked. His voice seemed to come from very far away. Maya looked up at the sky. Where the Kolari fleet had been, there was nothing but empty space and distant stars. A few pieces of debris drifted slowly, glowing from residual heat. But the ships were gone. The threat was gone. "It worked," she said. Then she sat down on a piece of rubble and started to cry. News of New Eden spread across human space like wildfire. A mining colony with no military had destroyed an entire Kolari fleet using a weapon built from spare parts and desperation. The story was incredible. The story was impossible. The story was true. Within days, journalists were arriving at the colony. They interviewed Maya and her team. They examined the destroyed power station. They recorded everything they could find. The story spread to every human world, carried by news broadcasts and word of mouth. Within weeks, engineers across the galaxy were studying the reports, trying to understand what Maya Chen and her team had done. They analyzed the theory behind the resonance field. They examined the use of natural crystals. They calculated the power requirements and marveled at the creativity of using mining charges as a power source. Within months, the first military versions of the resonance weapon were being tested. They were more refined than the original, more controlled, more powerful, but they were based on the same principle. They used the same basic design. They were the children of the device that 32 engineers had built in 3 days. The Kolari Empire had been expanding for 300 years. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. They had absorbed hundreds of species. They had never been stopped. They had never been defeated. They had never found an enemy they could not destroy. Until now. The weapon that Maya Chen built from mining equipment and natural crystals became the foundation for a new type of defense. Human engineers improved and refined it. They made it smaller, more efficient, more reliable. They integrated it into ships and stations and orbital platforms. They called it the Chen Field Generator. And with it, humanity began to push back. 5 years after the Battle of New Eden, Maya Chen stood on the bridge of the battleship Defiance and watched as the largest Kolari fleet ever assembled prepared to attack the human core worlds. It was a fleet of 3,000 ships, the greatest force the Insectoid Empire had ever gathered. It represented their last, desperate attempt to crush the humans who had become such a threat. She was no longer chief engineer of a mining colony. She was Admiral Chen now, commander of the First Defense Fleet. The weapon she had built in desperation had become the foundation of a new military doctrine. She had been promoted and promoted again, rising through ranks that did not exist until she created them. Every ship in her fleet carried an improved version of the resonance weapon. They were sleek and powerful and precise, nothing like the ugly mess of cables and crystals she had built on New Eden. They could fire multiple times without overheating. They could target specific ships or affect entire formations. They were the most advanced weapons humanity had ever created. But the principle was the same. Human engineers had looked at an impossible problem and found a solution that no one else would have tried. "The Kolari are charging their weapons," her tactical officer reported. "Let them," Maya said. The enemy fleet opened fire. Thousands of energy beams lanced toward the human ships. The void of space lit up with deadly light. Maya gave the order. 300 Chen field generators activated at once. The resonance wave that swept through space was perfectly calibrated, perfectly timed, perfectly devastating. It was not chaotic like the first weapon. It was controlled, precise, lethal. The Kolari fleet stopped firing, then it stopped existing. Maya watched the explosions fade and thought about a young engineer named David Park who had suggested using natural crystals. He was an admiral now too, commanding his own fleet in another sector. She thought about Sarah Walsh, the physicist who had done impossible calculations. Sarah had won the highest scientific awards humanity could give, and now led a research institute dedicated to studying resonance physics. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had stood beside her when everything seemed hopeless. Marcus had died 2 years ago, killed in a battle against Kolari reinforcements. His name was on a memorial wall, alongside thousands of others who had given their lives. They had all become heroes of humanity. They had all changed the course of history. But Maya remembered a different time. She remembered standing on a balcony and watching death descend from the sky. She remembered looking at a pile of spare parts and broken machines and thinking that it was all they had. She remembered the fear and the desperation and the impossible hope. That was the real human strength, she thought, not the weapons they built or the battles they won. It was the ability to look at desperation and see opportunity, to take broken things and make them whole, to refuse to give up even when giving up was the only sensible choice. The Kolari had never understood that. They saw humans as weak because they valued individuals. They saw humans as primitive because their technology was less advanced. They saw humans as inferior because they did not conquer and consume like proper civilizations should. They never understood that human weakness was also human strength, that caring about individuals meant fighting harder to protect them, that primitive technology meant engineers who could build weapons from anything, that refusing to give up meant finding solutions where none should exist. "Admiral," her tactical officer said, "the Kolari fleet has been completely destroyed." "I know," Maya said. "Set course for the next engagement." Humanity was going on the offensive now. After 300 years of Kolari expansion, the insectoids were being pushed back for the first time. Human fleets were liberating conquered worlds. Human engineers were building better and better weapons. Human soldiers were fighting and dying to free species that had been enslaved for generations. And it had all started with 32 engineers and a pile of spare parts. Maya Chen looked out at the stars and smiled. The war lasted another 12 years. It was brutal and costly, and millions died on both sides. Entire worlds were destroyed. Whole species were caught in the crossfire. The galaxy burned with conflict. But in the end, humanity won. The Kolari Empire was broken. Their homeworld was occupied. Their fleets were destroyed. Their ability to make war was ended forever. For the first time in their 300-year history, they were forced to negotiate peace with a species they had tried to consume. The treaty was signed on board the battleship Defiance, in the same conference room where Maya had planned so many campaigns. She was old now, her hair white and her face lined with years of war. The arm that had been broken at New Eden still ached sometimes, a reminder of where everything had started. Her hearing in her right ear had never fully recovered. But her eyes were still sharp, still full of the determination that had saved New Eden all those years ago. The Kolari representative was a new commander, young and uncertain. His name was Thrix, and he had risen to power after the old leadership was destroyed. His people had never negotiated with other species before. They had only conquered. They did not know how to be anything else. "Why?" he asked Maya after the treaty was signed. "Why did you fight so hard? You could have surrendered. You could have been absorbed into the empire. You would have survived. Your species would have continued just as part of our civilization." Maya thought about the question for a long moment. "When I was a young engineer," she said, "I worked on a mining colony. We had nothing. No ships, no weapons, no chance of victory. When your fleet came, everyone said we should surrender. The governor considered it. The people talked about it. It would have been the sensible choice. But you didn't." "No, we built a weapon from spare parts and hope and stubbornness. We used natural crystals because we didn't have artificial ones. We channeled energy through the planet itself because we didn't have enough power otherwise. We did everything wrong by every textbook ever written, and somehow it worked." "That weapon changed everything," the Kolari said. "It ended our expansion. It destroyed our fleets. It broke our empire." "Yes, but do you know what really ended it?" The Kolari waited. "It was the decision to try," Maya said. "Not the weapon itself, but the choice to build it. The choice to fight even when fighting seemed impossible. That's what you never understood about humans. That's what you could never see." She stood up slowly, her old joints protesting. "We don't give up," she said. "Even when we should. Even when it would be smarter to surrender. Even when every logical calculation says we've already lost. We find broken things and make them work. We find impossible problems and solve them. We look at desperation and see possibility." The Kolari representative was silent for a long moment. His insected face was impossible to read, but something in his posture suggested deep thought. "Your people are strange," he said finally. Maya laughed. "Yes, we are." She walked out of the room, leaving the Kolari to contemplate the treaty that had ended their empire. Maya Chen died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 92. She was surrounded by family, by friends, by colleagues who had shared her journey. Her last words were about crystals and resonance frequencies, the mind still working even at the end. By then, she was the most famous human who had ever lived. Schools were named after her. Statues stood in her honor on 100 worlds. The mining colony of New Eden had become a memorial, a place where people came from across the galaxy to see where everything had changed. But the thing that mattered most was not the statues or the schools. It was the principle that her life had proven. Human engineers were not the smartest in the galaxy. Other species had more advanced technology, more sophisticated science, more centuries of accumulated knowledge. Their ships were not the fastest or strongest. Their weapons were not the most powerful. But they were the most creative, the most stubborn, the most willing to try things that should not work and make them work anyway. They saw problems as challenges instead of obstacles. They saw failure as a step toward success instead of an ending. The Chen field generator was still the foundation of human defense technology, even decades after her death. It had been improved and refined 1,000 times. It barely resembled the original device anymore. But it was based on the same principle. It carried the same spirit. More than that, it was a symbol, a reminder of what humans could do when they refused to give up, a testament to the power of desperation and creativity combined. On the anniversary of the Battle of New Eden, humans across the galaxy paused to remember. They remembered the 32 engineers who had changed history. They remembered Maya Chen, who had looked at destruction and seen possibility. And in engineering schools on every human world, professors told the story. They told their students about natural crystals and mining charges, and a device that looked like a mistake but worked like a miracle. They told them about a team that worked without sleep for 3 days, pushing themselves beyond exhaustion because 12,000 lives depended on them. They told them about the moment when Maya Chen pressed the button, knowing that she might be killing herself and everyone around her. And they always ended with the same lesson. When everything seems impossible, when all hope is gone, when surrender is the only sensible choice, remember New Eden. Remember that human ingenuity has no limits. Remember that desperation can be the mother of the greatest inventions. Remember that broken things can save worlds. The story of the Terran engineers who built a weapon from desperation became legend. It spread beyond human space, told by aliens who had seen what humans could do when pushed to the edge. It was told in trading posts and military academies, in diplomatic gatherings and children's bedrooms. And everywhere it was told, it carried the same message. Never underestimate humans. Because when they have nothing, that's when they're most dangerous. When they're desperate, that's when they build weapons that change history. When the universe tells them something is impossible, that's when they work hardest to prove it wrong. That's when they become truly unstoppable. In the end, the Kolari learned this lesson the hard way. So did every other species that tried to conquer humanity after them. The galaxy learned that humans were not to be dismissed, not to be underestimated, not to be pushed into a corner. Because in that corner, with nothing but broken machines and impossible odds, humans would find a way to win. They always did. That was the legacy of New Eden. That was the legacy of Maya Chen. That was the legacy of 32 engineers who refused to die quietly. And it changed the galaxy forever.